Good evening. My name is Douglas Ray, and as Dean of the St. Thomas University School of Law, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this very significant evening. I thank you for joining us. We are pleased to have with us three of Florida's distinguished former governors, and we are all deeply appreciative of their leadership and their public service. Tonight, they will discuss the environmental challenges and opportunities Florida faces as it embraces a future of economic growth, demographic change, and an ever-changing climate. These are issues of importance to every Floridian, and of particular interest here at St. Thomas to those in our environmental sustainability certificate and graduate programs directed by Professors Light and Rosardi. This program tonight is jointly hosted by the law schools of Ave Maria University, Florida International University, which is joining us electronically this evening, Nova Southeastern University, and St. Thomas University. The Florida Bar Environmental and Land Use section has graciously provided the funding for this event, and the Florida Earth Foundation and its executive director, Stan Bronson, were instrumental in the early planning of the event and the outreach to the governors. Within St. Thomas, Associate Dean C.C. Dykes, Professor Roy Baesti, Assistant Dean Peter Kelly, Mr. Douglas Edwards, Ms. Kiana Hartley, and Professor Keith Rosardi were responsible for planning the event. Please join me in thanking our sponsors and our organizers. Tonight's program will be in the form of a panel question and answer session. Former Florida Attorney General and former St. Thomas Law Dean Bob Butterworth will begin the program by introducing the governors and asking them the first question. We will then have questions from faculty members at the four sponsoring law schools, represented by Professor Keith Rosardi of St. Thomas, Professor James Porter, who is participating remotely with his students at Florida International, Professor Andrew Dickman of Ave Maria, and Professor Joel Mintz of Nova. All are environmental law experts. They have practiced at the highest levels of federal and state government and private practice, written books and articles that changed the law, and played leading roles in state, national, and international bodies dedicated to protecting our planet. They will be followed by students from each of the law schools, each of whom was selected for his or her excellence and support for the environment. It's now my pleasure to turn the program over to Dean and Attorney General Bob Butterworth and ask you to join me and thank him for his leadership and service as well.
Dean, thank you so very, very much. It's really an honor and it's a pleasure to be back in the Moot Courtroom. I wish also to thank the law schools for doing this. This is very important. It is something which you'll be very pleased and you'll remember this for a very long time, because tonight we have with us three of Florida's finest public servants. Each accomplished so much good in public service, and each is still continuing to do so much. And all have been true champions of the environment. It humbles me to do this brief introduction of these three fantastic human beings and former governors. First, our 38th governor, Senator Bob Graham. He started off in public service by being elected to the State House in this year of 1966. Now, I know all of you remember that year very well. I'm just kidding. Your parents might. The senator had served a number of years in the House, went to the state Senate, then, of course, served 8 years as governor, and then 18 years in the United States Senate. After leaving public service, he was appointed by President Obama to chair the National Commission on the BP oil spill. He's an author of 4 books, including his newest, and it's a thriller, The Keys to the Kingdom. Those of you who have seen that book, there's a senator in the book, and on the first chapter, he is deceased. That senator lives in Miami Lakes, has 5 children versus 4 children, so we know you're not writing about yourself, the senator. He's also working on the Bob Graham Center for Public Service at the University of Florida. Thank you. Next, the 42nd Governor and 14th Lieutenant Governor, Buddy MacKay. Governor MacKay has served in the Florida legislature, the United States House of Representatives for 3 terms, Lieutenant Governor, and Governor. And then President Bill Clinton appointed Governor MacKay to be a special envoy for the Americas. History records, and it's been stated many times, that Governor MacKay was the most significant lieutenant governor in Florida's history. And having been here for those years, that's absolutely correct. He also has not stopped serving. He is heading up, and has for a number of years, a program in the 5th Circuit, which is primarily the Marion County, Ocala area, of dealing with foster children in order to have mediation, in order to have that child either returned back to the home safely or to be adopted as quickly as possible. This is saving many, many thousands of lives. Right now, the state of Florida has the greatest reduction in children in at-home care and the largest number of adoptions in the country. I thank you, Governor MacKay, for what you're doing. Our 44th governor, Governor Charlie Crist. Many of you, especially faculty, have met the governor before, because 3 times he came here and gave the welcoming speech to the 1Ls. Now, of course, he's the youngster here. He didn't start, well, his first job out of law school was he was the general counsel to the minor league baseball. That's a pretty big thing. Those of you who are not baseball fans, we'll talk about that later. He started in public service in the state Senate in 1992. He then ran for education commissioner, which is a member of the Florida cabinet. He then became Florida's Attorney General, also a member of the Florida cabinet. He then became governor of the state, which is also part of the cabinet. He's the only person in the history of the state of Florida to have served on 2 cabinet posts and also as the governor of the state. He also is still involved in doing many things for the people of the state. He's teaching at another law school called Stetson. He's practicing law. And one thing he did a lot of great things as governor, as all the men up here have, but he advocated for and signed legislation requiring paper records of all ballots cast during all elections in the state of Florida. One of the first states to do that. Governor, thanks very much for your service. Looking forward to the presentation. To start this off, the first question will go to the senior governor, Senator Bob Grant. Governor, during your time as governor, what was the greatest environmental challenge you encountered? And how can Florida's current leaders learn from your experience?
Bob, thank you for leading us tonight. Thank you for all the things that you've done for this state. This man has had more jobs than any other person. I had 408 jobs, and I thought I had a lot. He surpassed that, and I am proud to say I was in a position to appoint him to a number of those jobs. Each one was fulfilled with great skill and high levels of integrity. I want to thank St. Thomas University and the sponsors for giving us this opportunity to come together. This is a little bit of a reunion for the three of us, and we appreciate the chance to be here. The greatest challenge that I faced was the Everglades. It is an international treasure which has been for many decades in serious trouble. One of the characteristics of the Everglades is it's a little off camera. If we were in Colorado, no one would ever say the Rocky Mountains were out of sight. But the Everglades, for most Floridians, for most of the time, are out of sight. And therefore, it's easy to forget them. We didn't forget them in the period of 1969 to 1971 because the Everglades went dry. They became, instead of a swamp, they became a large peat bog, and they burned. And they, for the better part of 2.5 years, smoke covered from Homestead to Hobe Sound. That event galvanized the state around the question of what is going on with our Florida and what can we do about it. By the time I was governor, almost 10 years later, some of that energy had started to wane and had to be regenerated. The challenge and the lessons that I learned from the challenge of the Everglades included, one, that you had to take the long view. The Everglades took a century to get into the state that they were when the fires broke out, and it's going to take probably a half a century to resuscitate them back to something like they were in their natural condition. That means that you have to be thinking not just of the decisions that are going to be required this year or this election cycle, but rather what are the decisions that you're going to have to make for the 20 or 25-year period into the future. And second lesson that I learned from the Everglades experience was the importance of partnerships, starting with partnerships within the state. There was a group that had the clumsy title of the South Florida Sustainability Commission. This was the first time many people ever heard the word sustainability. And it was made up of all the stakeholders with responsibility in the Everglades and came with a plan which had enough breadth of support and had worked through the potentially contentious problems to the point that when it was presented to the Congress in the year 2000, it passed the House of Representatives unanimously and with only one negative vote in the Senate. I'll not say who that person was, because I don't want you to feel ill about him. He is just misguided and ignorant. So those were some of the lessons that I learned from that great challenge, and it's a challenge which Governor Scott and future governors will be contending with until finally we've arrived at our destination, which is to have the Everglades look and function at that point in time more like they did before man began to shovel ditches into the glades.
Thank you. He's a tough act to follow. I want to thank General Butterworth as well. And Senator Graham certainly is correct when he states how great a public servant Bob Butterworth has been. He served as Attorney General for 16 years. I had to follow him. So it's been a series of tough acts to follow for me. But Bob Butterworth was kind enough after I got elected governor to accept the appointment as Secretary of the Department of Children and Families. And as Governor Senator Graham has said before, he always served with great distinction and with tremendous integrity. And thank you, General Butterworth, for your service to the people of the state of Florida. Please give him a round of applause because he deserves it. Thank you, St. Thomas. And thank you, Dean, for your kindness and putting this thing together. The three of us were together at the University of Florida on October 12th last fall. And we had a lot of fun then, and I'm sure we will have a lot of fun now. I am, to say the least, honored and humbled to be among these great former governors, Governor McKay and Governor Graham. And I even remember 1966, believe it or not. I may be the youngest here, but I'm old enough to remember that. The question is an important one. What was the greatest environmental challenge while you had the opportunity to serve as governor? And for me, it was really a combination of things. Probably the most difficult challenge, however, was the BP oil spill. It was the most significant environmental disaster in the history of our country. And I will never forget when it began. I was in Miami. I received a phone call from a Coast Guard admiral, and she said, we have this problem in the Gulf of Mexico, Governor. There has been a leak that has begun on the bottom of the Gulf. It is somewhere south of New Orleans, but not too far from your state. And I just wanted to make you aware of that, and hopefully it won't last too long. Well, days and days and days thereafter, it continued. And it was frightening. And if you can remember back then, it wasn't that long ago, we learned a lot of new terminology, like loop currents, particularly those in this part of the state, how the possibility of this oil getting into a loop current coming all the way around the Florida Keys and up to the east coast of Florida was a possibility. It affected our tourism in a way that I don't think we've ever seen before as a state. I was pleased to see that those tourism numbers are back up again. That's good. But the real grave concern that I felt as governor, and fortunately at the time, Senator Graham was heading the commission for the president to address this severe and significant issue, and we met several times on Pensacola Beach. But I want to give credit to the administration as well, the Obama administration, because President Obama himself, Vice President Biden, Janet Napolitano, and others in the administration continually came down to Florida. Valerie Jarrett, who's a very significant senior advisor to the president, would have daily calls with all of the Gulf state governors from this Democratic administration. And at the time, I stress, all of those governors were Republican. One of them isn't anymore, but at any rate, the administration really did, with the leadership of Senator Graham and with the genuine leadership of President Obama, come to the aid and the protection of our beautiful Florida. And I think because of that constant information sharing, it made it a little less scary than it might have been otherwise. There's no question in my mind. And so we have a lot to be thankful for as Floridians and as Americans for the kind of leadership that we have in Washington. And I will never forget the time that the president came to Pensacola Beach, and we were walking on the beach together, and we were looking for, tar balls or oil wash up. By the grace of God alone, we really didn't have that much on our shores. We really didn't. There was some on Pensacola Beach, and that was about it. But the perception that was all over the world is that this oil was all over our Florida beaches. Whether you lived in Europe or Asia or a potential tourist, that perception was out there. And as a result, again, the administration, with some of our encouragement, really came to the fore and held those accountable who were the wrongdoers and set up a $20 billion fund to compensate the states and the municipalities and the private citizens and property owners that were affected. And that was a very important thing to have accomplished. So that was the greatest challenge. The other one was one that Governor Graham talked about, the Everglades. During our administration, we attempted to have a significant purchase of the Everglades by the state, to keep it in public hands, to protect it. And a great author who wrote the book, The River of Grass, once said, she said, the only way we can really protect the Everglades properly is to buy it. Buy it for the people and protect it. And so we have a great national park. It really is international in nature. But the continued protection and concern about this beautiful, unique place on the planet is something we have to always, I believe, be vigilant about, because Governor Graham is right. We don't all see it every day. It is somewhat out of sight. And so it's important for all of us to be sure to get there, to share it with our families, and to perpetuate it forever. Thank you.
I'll have to start with a couple of disclaimers. I was governor for 3 weeks. I was Lawton Childs' lieutenant governor for 8 years. I was Bob Graham's, one of his lieutenant governors. By that I mean he grabbed everybody near him and put them to work. So I wanted to say that. The other thing I wanted to say is that it was very important to Charlie Crist that he be in the center. And I volunteered to be on the left since I've been known as a liberal and have nothing left to lose. Lawton Childs and I announced for governor one day, and the next day we had a call from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. She was 100 years old. She was blind. She said, "You all are coming down here, and I'm going to endorse you because you're going to save the Everglades." And we said, "Yes, ma'am." And so we did. She endorsed us. And shortly after the election, she called and said, "You know, you've been in office 3 or 4 weeks. What have you done?" The South Florida Water Management District was having a meeting. There was a lawsuit going on, been brought by the Miccosukee Indians to force Florida to abide by its own water quality standards in the Glades. So the South Florida Water Management District had hired a Philadelphia law firm, now get this, paid $6 million in fees over a couple of years to try to say that A, it's not polluted, and B, if it is polluted, it wasn't us. So they were having a meeting, so we went to the meeting, and Lawton was sworn in, and to the astonishment of his lawyers, he said, "I'm here to surrender. To whom do I hand my sword?" He went on to say, "We stipulate the Everglades is polluted. We stipulate the state of Florida is part of the problem, and we intend to be part of the solution." That led to a historic negotiation. Part of my job was to be the troubleshooter. Trouble, by the way, shoots back. And so I led the Florida negotiating team. Of course, I immediately turned to Bob Butterworth. When they're shooting at you, he's a good guy to have on your side. But anyway, it was mediated for 2 years. There was a mediated settlement. That's what went to the Congress, and that's what got started. The deal was the sugar industry was going to pay a third, the state was going to pay a third, the feds were going to pay a third. Last year, the Everglades Foundation did a study of how the costs have gone thus far, and it turns out sugar's paid about 15%. So that, by the way, leads to the second half of the question. The second half of the question was kind of an invitation to an editorial. It said, what can the elected officials learn from your experience here? I would phrase that differently. I would say, what could they have learned? Because they obviously haven't learned anything yet. And here's what I think they could learn. When Bob Graham was governor, he was part of litigating. The litigation started with the city of Orlando, which was dumping treated sewage into Shingle Creek, which was the Kissimmee River's headwater. He was then suing the dairy industry, of which his family had been a part, to get them to stop dumping cow manure, you could say BS, into the... and in essence, we sued everybody all the way down, including the sugar industry. So what is the lesson of that? One lesson is that when people treat downstream costs as externalities, that comes back to haunt you. And the externalities of Orlando and the dairy industry and the sugar industry and everybody else become an off-balance sheet liability to the state of Florida, and that's what it is today. Another lesson is off-balance sheet liabilities come back to haunt you in a big way, and that's what's happening. So, needless to say, I've got a lot more to say, but I speak Southern, and that means it's very slow, and so I need an extra minute. That's it. Thank you very much.
Hello, governors. I'm Keith Rosardi. I'm a professor here at St. Thomas University, and I'll be the first of 4 professors to be asking you a question. And Governor McKay, you'll be very happy that I'll be following up on the Everglades question, so you'll be getting an extra minute. After I go, Professor Porter will be speaking to you from the video in the back. We have a group of students at Florida International that are here. And for the next 4 questions, what we'll do is we'll direct again the question to one of the governors, and this question will be going to you, Governor McKay, so you will be getting your extra minute to start with. You'll get 4 minutes, and the other governors, you'll have another 3, and I'll be over there with the little placards holding them up to remind you to stay on time.
There is, Justin.
There is. And that indeed is what my question is about. It's following up on your point about the Everglades. You know, it's 20 years ago that Governor Childs walked into the courtroom and surrendered his sword. And we've spent a lot of money, and we've acquired a lot of land. The state of Florida has committed over $3 billion to the process. And it's a process that seems to be continually driven by litigation and settlements, and litigation and settlements. Is there a better way for us to come up with policy for the Everglades? And is the Everglades worth the cost in these incredible budgetary times?
All kidding aside, the Everglades is worth everything we can put into it, and the Everglades is attached to everything else. Anybody that thinks that you can let the Everglades go and it's not going to impact the rest of Florida and the rest of America is just not very realistic. The fact of the matter is it's worth what we're paying. This is the biggest reclamation project in the history of the world. That, by the way, was the biggest drainage project in the history of the world. This is a prototype of the 21st Century Corps of Engineers project, which is to unbuild the mistakes of the 20th century. We've got to stay behind it. The federal government, I'm convinced, will stay behind it if it looks like we're going to stay behind it. And we've got to have enough courage to force the sugar industry to pay its fair share. They're not evil people. They're in business to make a profit, and they're not in business to pay any costs that they can put off on anybody else. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas had a line that I love. She said, "Florida's economic history is a monumental bet that events can be propelled fast enough to stay ahead of consequences. Unfortunately," she said, "consequences have caught up." And consequences in Florida are what you call off-balance sheet liabilities. Let me just talk in a little more specific terms. An externality is like if you run a for-profit hospital and you limit access to the emergency room so your costs go down and the public picks up the tab. What we've got to have in Florida is full cost accounting, and we've got to somehow convince our public, and I believe in many ways the public is ahead of the elected officials. I think we've got to convince the public to go forward and get this state on a pay-as-you-go basis. There was a study done years ago called the Zwick Commission study. Some of you law students ought to take a look at it. It would make a very interesting thesis. The conclusion of the Zwick Commission study was that we are behind now in the cost it would take to cover the cost of growth, the hospital beds, the prison cells, the roads, the whole works. All of that's been dumped off, just like things were dumped off into the Everglades. The issue is, how do you catch up on that? That study was done in 1985. You might take those costs forward and see what it is now. We've got a huge off-balance sheet liability in a state that the Constitution says the budget has to be balanced. It's a very interesting phenomenon. You young people are going to be part of trying to bring this state to its senses. Another lesson that I'd like to point out is that this couldn't be happening if the executive branch and the legislative branch were doing their jobs. It could not be happening. And guess what? In our system, when that happens and those institutions break down, it's up to the judicial branch. This is a quote, Dean, so you'll just have to take it for what it is. The politically incorrect nursery rhymes. Have any of you read them? They're phenomenal. There's one in there about Chicken Little. You remember Chicken Little? Chicken Little said, "The sky's falling. We must rush to tell the king." In this one, Chicken Little says, "The sky's falling," and Henny Penny says, "Sue the bastards."
I guess the basic question is it worth it, what we would pay to save the Everglades, restore it, and maintain it? Of course it is. And Governor McKay laid it out very, very well. But I remember I was on my honeymoon, and I was calling the members of the South Florida Water Management District. Carol and I were staying on Yusepa Island in southwest Florida, near Boca Grande. And she's like, "Why are you on the phone so much? This is our honeymoon." And I said, "Well, dear, you're never not governor when you're the governor. And this vote is coming up very soon to try to persuade and encourage the members of the Water Commission to make this large purchase of the Everglades." And so I continued to call, and the commissioners continued to say yes, and eventually they voted to do so. And Keith was there as general counsel to the district, and thank you for your service at that time and your service as you continue here. But the point of the matter is to agree with what Governor McKay has said, that there is no cost too high to preserve something that God made that is unique on the planet. There is no other place in the world like the Everglades. It is the only place where alligators and crocodiles coexist. And of course now pythons too, but that's a story for another day. But it really is unique. And I've had the occasion, as these gentlemen have, and I hope all of you will take the occasion, to go visit it, take an airboat ride. I remember the first time I did so may have been when I ran against that guy. One of the dumbest things I ever did in my life. But one of the greatest results of that was I really got to know Governor Graham and what a gentleman and decent human being and great Floridian he is. That was back when you could run in a race and it didn't have to be toxic every day. And I hope we get back to that soon. But I remember taking a boat ride out there in the Everglades, and you got to see the wildlife, and it was amazing, and it was enchanting. But I took a boat ride there about 10 years later, an airboat ride, after a lot of the good work of these gentlemen and their administrations had come to pass. And the wildlife that I saw had grown exponentially. The birds, and it was just amazing to me. And this was quite a number of years after the drought that Governor Graham had described had occurred. And obviously the efforts of Florida were bringing to bear a change in a positive direction in maintaining the Everglades. But we have to partner with our federal partners, and they have to step up. And I think Governor McKay is exactly right. If we show genuine commitment to doing this, it will only encourage our partners at the federal level.
Charlie just upstaged me. I had a very well thought through, snarky comment about what does it say about a person's romantic qualities if on their honeymoon they're calling the South Florida Water Management District about regulatory policy. But he was so nice in his subsequent statements that I will not make that snarky comment.
We are at St. Thomas. We are at St. Thomas, so it was my confession to you.
We were asked a couple of questions. One about litigation and its role in the Everglades. It has played a very significant role, as Governor McKay just said. It's kind of literally the court of last resort when every other institution fails. I think, however, it is a generally inappropriate court. Courts are designed to solve specific issues of dispute between generally two parties. The Everglades, by its nature, is very eclectic and requires comprehensive and interrelated decisions, which are difficult for a judicial body to make. So I think that politicians have to accept, along with the public, the first line of responsibility for attempting to set and execute a plan for Everglades restoration. Second, I'm going to pick up on Buddy's use of a fancy term, and this is what happens when you grow up in a sophisticated place like Bellevue, Florida. You learn all these big words. That was supposed to be a joke. Let me phrase it another way, but maybe to make the same point. We're in an era now where one of the most trashed words is regulation. That it is excessive regulation that has caused our economic problems, and the removal of that excessive regulation will bring us happiness, joy, and wealth, and romance. There's a connection on that issue between the BP issue and the Everglades. In both of those instances, the key element of the story belongs to the public. The people of the United States of America own the Gulf of Mexico. The people of Florida own all the water in the Everglades system. So it's not a matter of regulating what somebody else owns, such as you would do in a zoning case. Rather, it's what I call the prudent landlord. The government of the United States in the first instance and the government of Florida in the second instance are the landlord for the people of America and Florida, and have in that a responsibility to be a prudent landlord so that the people's property is not returned degraded, trashed, and in some instances made no longer useful for a public purpose. So I think that is, for young lawyers, an important concept as you think about the role of government as it relates to public resources like the Gulf or the Everglades. And I will just expect a small, hardly noticeable percentage of your the legal fees that you will collect over a lifetime for having imparted that fundamental piece of wisdom.
Professor Porter, you're up next.
Thank you. Governor Graham, Governor McKay, Governor Crist, on behalf of the faculty and students at the FIU College of Law, I welcome you and thank you for your participation this evening. My question deals with climate change and is directed to Governor Crist. I know that you were particularly active in the climate change debate when you became governor of Florida. That seems to have slipped with our current administration. My question to you is this. Climate change is a global phenomenon with many local consequences resulting from activities that are outside of our state and not directly caused by the residents of the state of Florida. The cost to protect, harden, and relocate our critical infrastructure from rising sea levels will be in the billions of dollars just here in Miami-Dade County. Do you believe that the South Florida communities are sufficiently aware of the challenges and the costs? And where do you see the funding coming from? Is it fair to impose those costs on the local communities, or should those costs be shared by the state and federal governments?
Well, it's a great question, Jim. Thank you very much. And climate change is an issue that is debated often and not always agreed upon, and usually pretty controversial. I can remember the first person who mentioned to me that it ought to be an issue to focus on was a guy named John McCain. And it was when I was still Attorney General, General Butterworth. And so I started to look at it and to try to learn more about it. I always cared deeply about the environment. I remember the first time I ran for the state Senate, there were 4 issues that I ran on. I called them the 4 E's, and they were the economy, education, the environment, and ethics. And so, you know, when you grow up in Florida, it's hard not to care about the environment. If you don't, there's something wrong with you. Because we're exposed to such a beautiful environment continuously. And, you know, in St. Petersburg, which is my hometown, we're surrounded by water, and I love to go fishing and be out on that water, and felt as I got older, there was a duty to protect that environment and to protect the climate. And I remember my first act as a public official. I was student council president at my junior high school. We held a dance and raised $100, and I took the $100 check to the St. Petersburg City Council, this is 1971, and said, here's the first installment on beginning a recycling program in St. Petersburg. And so it's something I've always cared about. Climate change I wasn't sure of, you know, and a lot of people say, I don't know if it's real. This much I do know. The sea is rising. It's getting hotter. And unless I'm mistaken, the New York Times not long ago, just a few weeks, did a front page story about how 2012 was the hottest year on record. Something is definitely going on. And this much I also know, that the things that you would do to address climate change can only be beneficial for the environment as a whole anyway. So why not do them? Why not reduce the emissions? Why not clean up our water? Why not do the kind of things that are going to help keep Florida and our planet in a better posture in terms of the environment so future generations can enjoy what all of us have had the privilege to enjoy? And it's the right thing to do. Now, that's not a very complicated statement, but it's powerful. It is the right thing to do. We have a duty to be good stewards. I don't go to church every Sunday, but I have a great faith. And I think we do have a God-given obligation to protect what we get to see when we walk out of here tonight. It's pretty special stuff. And He's counting on us. So why let Him down? Thanks.
Well, we have a sharing of costs. It goes through the Congress now, and it depends on how much political power the state has that suffered the disaster. You could have a national insurance program. We're backing into it. When they have a earthquake in California, Congress appropriates money. In effect, we are helping insure their losses. Certainly we did it for New York. They did it for us in Hurricane Andrew. So we could formalize that. There are a lot of people who would make the argument that, well, that's just more, government encroachment. Fine, we'll encroach backward. We'll just do it as the disasters occur. But we're all part of the same country. We should insure each other's losses.
Well, I believe in the principle of polluter pays. Just as the Gulf of Mexico and water in Florida are public assets, the air is a public asset. We all have the right to use the air. Nobody has the right to pollute the air. I believe that we have a choice. We're either going to pay for it now as we attempt to slow down the pace of climate change and maybe even begin to reverse it, or pay an enormously larger bill if all the consequences of climate change occurs. I've seen a map of Dade County, what it would be like if there was a 3 or 4 foot rise in the ocean, which is almost baked into the cake now. And we're not going to be what we would describe today as a plateau, maybe, a shallow above sea level plateau. We're going to be a series of islands with extensive flooding on areas that are now occupied. Think of the enormous cost and loss of assets from people's homes to universities, although St. Thomas has got someone to protect them from this. And what that bill will be, I personally think the best and most prudent course of action is to try to avoid it from happening, and the cost allocation ought to be primarily to those persons who are intruding on our publicly owned clean air, and thus starting a chain of reaction which ends up with all of the evidences of man-made global warming.
Good evening, Governors. I'm Andrew Dickram from Ave Maria School of Law. We want to thank you for your individual and collective service to the Sunshine State very much. Thank you. My question is to you, Governor Graham. It's regarding land development and planning. As a Floridian growing up in Ruskin, Florida, I know too well that there are so many little jewels in Florida that you don't see every day off the interstate, and you do have to get off the interstate. But I have seen personally over the years the changes in Florida due to growth and planning or lack of planning. So my question is to you this. In 1985, the Growth Management Act was touted very strongly as a bold, progressive strategy to preserve Florida's environment and also to accommodate growth. Over the years, has it been successful, in your opinion? And has the new rewrite of the law, the growth management law, has it helped Florida, and will it help Florida in the future? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. It touches on an area in which I am personally very passionate. The history, the context of this is that Florida has been a state with a culture that was highly protective of private property rights. In 1939, the Florida legislature passed a bill which authorized all of the 67 counties in the state to engage in planning and zoning. We were at that point the 48th of 48 states to grant such authority. 30 years later, we did the same thing, and excuse me, I have substituted this. That first one was for municipalities. 30 years later, in 1969, we did the same thing for counties, at which time we were the 50th of 50 states to have granted to counties the authority to plan and zone. And it was in that context, and it largely took something as dramatic as the fire in the Everglades to alert people that something had gone wrong in the way in which we were utilizing our land and water in Florida, that we could have had a condition as severe as the drought in the Everglades and its consequences. That was the series of events that led to the passage of a number of state legislations, all designed to elevate the quality of development in the state and sensitivity to the effect of development on the environment. Was it successful? I think so, very much. For instance, the Florida Keys were in terrible shape in the 1970s. They were declared an area of critical state concern, and with a significant amount of state oversight and assistance, such as the South Florida Water Management District becoming effectively the water and sewer agency for the Keys and providing a reliable source of fresh water. I believe that the recent rollbacks of much of that legislation is frankly the result that we have a legislature, and I would say an executive branch, that has very little knowledge of Florida, its history, and the accumulated wisdom of what it takes to live in a special, fragile place like our peninsula state. I hope that future legislatures and future governors will revisit what has just happened and return us to the era in which people understood, cared, and were willing to make some sacrifices today to preserve a quality Florida for tomorrow.
I'd probably give the Revised Standard version of that answer, which I think was exactly on point. What that did was simply say, you've got to show in your plan for a new development that you're going to put in the infrastructure and you're going to pay the externality costs instead of dumping them on everybody else. For the first time in the history of this state, we had a time when we were actually requiring people to pay the full cost of a development. Now, I personally think pay as you go is a very conservative thing. Somehow or other, the legislature saw that as a liberal government overreaching. So now we're back, and guess what's going to happen? This is a battle between generations, by the way. And if you think the old people are not aware that they're dumping these costs on the young people, you got another thing coming. That ought to be the issue that you all run for office on. Thank you.
Well, as usual, my two colleagues have laid it out very well, and usually when you're the third to go, most of it's been said, and said very articulately. So I would clearly agree with both Governor Graham and Governor McKay in what they have said about growth management, the importance of it, and that we have to be vigilant as a state to make sure that we want to continue to grow, but we ought to grow smart and apply a lot more common sense to how we do it in order to protect Florida going forward.
Gentlemen, my name is Professor Joel Mintz. I teach at Nova Southeastern Law School. And I'd like to mention that I, too, appreciate your service very much and your presence here this evening. My question is directed to Governor McKay. Sir, for many years, the state of Florida has held legal title to the waters of the state, including both surface water and groundwater. And in recent times, some people have advocated a different arrangement under which the state would transfer ownership to private entities of the water, including companies that sell bottled water, agricultural interests, and other private entities. And I'm wondering what your views are with respect to those proposals.
My family's involved in agriculture, as is Bob Graham's. This is an incredible battle that's going on in the state, and it's a long-term battle. It's not being fought in public. The fact that we have got public ownership of the water, I think, is incredibly important. I think the mistake we're making is we're giving it away free. I think there ought to be a consumption fee policy in the state of Florida, and I think it could be done politically. By the way, I told this to Lawton Childs, and he said, I'd like to hear your views on redistribution of land to the peasants. So there is a little controversy involved with it. You could do it so that the amount of water a family needs is free. And you could do it then so that it basically was to put a price on water so people would treat it as a precious resource. Our mistake is not that it's in public ownership. Our mistake is it's being allowed to be used free and it's being wasted something fierce.
I agree, and I think it should be continued in public ownership. It's one of the reasons our administration was motivated to do what we did as it related to the Everglades. And I think that one of the things that Governor McKay and Governor Graham, and I would add Attorney General Butterworth, worked very hard as Attorney General to protect those waters as it related to the issue between the private sector. And the waters of Florida belong to Floridians. And, you know, the notion that it should be any other way is foreign to me. And I think that as long as we stay on that path, maybe some other good ideas to make it appropriate or not as costly, or that those who utilize it would pay for it, are the kind of things that we ought to explore going forward.
Every once in a while in life, you get a break. Florida got one a little more than 10 years ago. There was a very serious effort at privatizing water. You know what entity was the primary force behind that privatization effort? You ever heard of a company called Enron? That was the sword carrier for privatization of water in Florida. When Enron collapsed, the campaign collapsed, but not the interest of those like Enron who wanted the enormous economic advantages of owning water in a state like Florida. We've talked a lot about the Everglades. I want to talk a little bit about some of the places around where Buddy lives. How many here have been to Silver Springs? Okay. If this crowd didn't have all these kids in here, that was supposed to be a joke too. The percentage would be much higher, because when I was growing up, pre-Disney, Silver Springs was the place to go. It was the iconic signature of Florida. Well, I can tell you that today Silver Springs is in very serious trouble. The average historic water flow of Silver Springs, and you might want to write this down, was 800 cubic feet per second. Today, it's less than 250 cubic feet per second. As a consequence of that, and a significant amount of polluting activity around Silver Springs, it is multiple times the amount of pollution that it can tolerate. Now, that's in a situation where theoretically the water belongs to the public and we're responsible for it. Can you imagine what the withdrawals out of the Silver River would be, and out of Silver Springs, if somebody said, I own all this water, and if I want to take it and use it today to fill up plastic bottles or whatever, I have the right to do so. I think it's an incredibly terrible idea for Florida. It's not going to happen the way Enron plotted it, which would have been a one battle, one win war. It's happening incrementally as in area after area, such as today. It used to be you couldn't get a consumptive use permit for more than 8 years to take water out of a Florida river or stream. That gradually got increased. Today it's 20 years. There is a proposal which may well be decided on in this year, 2013, to increase it to 40 years with almost no means by which to withdraw the consumptive use in the event that there is a higher need for the water than that was decided decades in the past. So this is a real issue, and I'm glad that it was raised here tonight, and I hope that all of you will be mindful of this and the destructive effect it would have on our state if the public gave up its ownership of our most fundamental natural resource, fresh water.
Governors, thank you for being so efficient. We are right on schedule. So the next phase of this discussion is going to include questions from each of the law schools and 4 students from the law schools. The first one will be one of my students, Mr. Cameron Long. Mr. Governor, Governor Chris, can you reach your microphone that fell behind you, or do you need me to grab it? I got it. I saw it go over. So Cameron, come on up. Oh, and it's 2 minutes each.
Good evening. My name is Cameron Long, and I'm a student in the LLM program in environmental sustainability here at St. Thomas. And on behalf of our students, we thank each of you for being here tonight. I moved to South Florida from Alabama, where Native American tribe issues always seem to be at the forefront. So it's along those lines that I first directed the question to Governor Crist. When I began studying the Everglades restoration, I learned pretty quickly that for many years, the Miccosukee tribe was a major factor in litigation involving Everglades restoration. Do you think that Florida could do more to enhance its relationships with the tribal governments in Florida?
There's no question about it. It's a great question. You know, I'm an optimist. So I am a firm believer that the future can always be brighter and that relationships can always be better. And I had an experience during our administration that involved one of the other tribes in Florida, the Seminole tribe, in working out a compact so that the tribe would have the ability to utilize their property for entertainment for Floridians and others of our tourists. So can we do better in our relationships with the tribes? Of course. Can Republicans and Democrats work together better? They better. So you're asking somebody a question that I think has great importance not only in Florida, but in our country. Can we work together to have a better future, whether we're those who have come over on the Mayflower or the sons and daughters and granddaughters and grandsons of immigrants or the Native Americans themselves? And I believe that we all can and that we all must, and I think that we all will.
The answer is yes, you can always work better. But I think that the story that Buddy told about the fact that it was the Miccosukie's suit back in the 1990s that really was the catalytic event for much of what has happened in a positive direction from for the Everglades. The Miccosukees didn't have any particular economic stake in what was happening. They had their reservation out in the middle of the Everglades, just north of I-75, and they were daily observing and suffering from the consequences of what was happening further north. And after having exhausted the political approach, they did what was suggested. They went to court. And it was their forceful advocacy that had a great deal to do with the ultimate surrender of the state. And I don't know if Governor Childs ever did find who to give his sword to, and the progress that we've made. So I commend the Miccosukes for their contribution.
I think it's very important that you've got somebody like that really intensely care about the environment and that are not subject to the constrictions and the pressures, the political pressures that other people are subject to. A major issue, and you all are studying this, is when you get a regulatory agency, if you're not careful, it gets captured by the people it's supposed to be regulating. Well, you can make a pretty good case right now that all of our water management districts have been captured. And you say, well, why doesn't somebody do something about it? There are a lot of political pressures not to do that. I like the fact that the Miccosukes were willing to stand up, and they were easy to work with. And their motives were right out there for everybody to see. I think they're a great asset for the state of Florida, and frankly, I hope they'll crank up and sue some more water management districts.
Could we get the student from Florida International on the monitor, please?
All right, this question is addressed to Governor Graham. My name is Shannon Kaplan. I'm the president here at the Environmental Law Society for Florida National University. Can you hear me? Okay. Basically, the question I want to ask you is, with the hurricanes getting worse and with that superstorm Sandy that just devastated tons of coastline in New Jersey, climate scientists have warned that these intense storms may become more common in the future. And that's frightening, especially for us with our state that has so much coastline. So my question to you is, what can be done to protect our coastlines from this? And what are some things that we should start doing now?
You were a little bit broken up, but I think you were asking, what could we do to protect our state from the consequences of global warming?
Well, not just global warming, but also from the storms that have been happening, such as what happened with Hurricane Sandy up north.
Well, the most fundamental thing we could do is to first apply good science, and I think the jury is in on that. The overwhelming number of scientists globally have agreed that, one, yes, the planet is warming at a rate significantly higher than has been the history of the climate of Earth, and two, that much of the responsibility for that is human intervention, particularly the release of emissions that have affected our sunlight and have captured the heat and not allowed it to escape. That I've now given you all that I learned in 8th grade science at Hialeah Junior High School. And I think rather than ponder over what we are going to do to try to avoid what is almost a certain catastrophic series of events if this warming continues, and many of you in this room today are going to be alive when those events occur. This is not something theoretical for the next century. And so the key is, what can we do today to begin to dampen the speed of this warming and hopefully reverse it. And as I said earlier, I think the key is to put an economic price on polluting our publicly owned clean air to the point that it will no longer be tolerable for electric utilities, which are the source of almost half of the emissions in the United States, to continue to put out that polluted air. And we, as drivers of automobiles, will be using machines and petroleum products or some alternative to petroleum, like electricity, for our automobiles, which will be significantly less polluting. Those are tough steps, but they pale in comparison to what the consequences will be if we don't take those tough steps.
I think I mentioned that I had the opportunity to speak in New Delhi at a sustainable conference just a couple weeks ago, and one of the things that was clear to me, the Prime Minister of India was there, there were a lot of former leaders that were there. There were not a ton of Americans there, but there was a representative from the current federal administration, from the Secretary of State's office. But the consistent theme over and over again from those in South America, in Central America, in Asia, in Africa, was that we need the United States to lead. The United States of America is the leader in the world, and if the United States of America will take hold of this issue of climate change and sustainability and truly lead on it, we have an opportunity to get others to follow suit, more so than if you all don't. And a couple of us in the room that were Americans, at least I took it to heart. And again, I want to compliment the President because he's renewed the debate and the discussion about climate change, and that's where it begins. And so I think that, again, if we take a leadership role as the most powerful nation on the planet, we have a much better opportunity to do the very smart things that Governor Graham and I'm sure Governor McKay will recommend. Reduce our emissions. We as a state are particularly susceptible to these kinds of changes. All you have to do is look at 2004 or 2005 and see the number of hurricanes that we suffered from to see that this is accelerating rapidly. We've been very blessed the past few years, and thank God for that. But this continuing temperature rise, the rise of the seas, and the issues that we've talked about here are the kind of thing that really require United States leadership.
I'll just, I agree with everything that you all have said. I'd like to just bring this back to the state of Florida. The state of Florida needs to have policies that put the marginal cost of one more home on the person who decides to build that home where he or she decides to build it. In other words, the marginal cost or the marginal risk to this state of one more home on the coast or one more high-rise condo on the coast is extraordinarily greater than the marginal risk of putting that same home in the middle or the northern part of the state. The only reason I say that is our state policy right now says, oh no, we're going to average those costs. So the insurance industry said, no, you got to have the marginal cost put on the person who's going to cause it. And so the legislature said, oh no, we'll set up our own insurance company and we'll spread that cost across everybody. You all are the ones, when we have a big storm, who are going to find out what that means. It's going to mean the state of Florida is going to be a very expensive place to live. So anyway, when you get to the legislature, see if you can talk them into looking at a couple of economic terms. Thank you.
Good evening, Governors. My name is Kate Campbell. I'm a student at Ave Maria School of Law and president of the Environmental Law Society. And this question is for Governor McKay. As you know, the beaches and coral reefs are a huge part of Florida's tourist economy. And during my lifetime, due to sea rise, rising oceans may eliminate large portions of this coastline. So at this point, what should we do? And should beach renourishments start now? Thank you.
So should beach renourishment start now? Beach renourishment goes on now. It's a function of the political power of the people who live at the beach where the water has washed the sand away. It's not a function of science. So beach renourishment's being done right now. It's being done in a way that doesn't make an awful lot of sense, but politically that's what's happening. I believe the risk and the cost of living on a beach ought to be put on the people who choose to live there. I believe the insurance industry would set a discipline that our own legislature is not willing to set. And I think this is one place where we ought to allow risk to be privatized. What we're doing is we're socializing profit and we're privatizing profit and socializing risk. So I look at it as in a very different way for somebody who's supposed to be a liberal Democrat. I'm saying, where in the world are the Republicans?
I think your question just underscores the importance of this issue. We had a presidential campaign in 2012, and the words climate change were hardly uttered. Now we're in 2013. We have established our governmental leadership at the federal level for the next 4 years, and I am very proud that President Obama has stepped forward and is now not only uttering the words, but shouting the words, and has committed that this is going to be one of the priorities of his second term in office. As to Florida, there aren't many sentences which have both the word Florida and Bangladesh enclosed. One of those sentences is, if there is a 3-foot rise of the ocean, what are the 2 areas in the world that will be the most affected? Bangladesh and Florida. So we have a particularly high interest in this issue. Yes, we are part of the problem, but we also need to be in a leadership position for the rest of the country, the rest of the Western Hemisphere, and the world, because it's in our own self-interest since we are at the center of the bullseye should this event become reality.
I am from the west coast of Florida. I grew up in St. Petersburg and live there today, and that's in Pinellas County, for those of you who may not be familiar. But Pinellas County is also a peninsula, and so I refer to it as the peninsula on the peninsula. And so when you ask a question about beach renourishment, I'm surrounded by beaches where I live. And when I got elected to the state senate, as Governor McKay indicated, it's a very political issue. And if in your infancy as a legislator, you don't fight to protect the industry that's doing a lot for your fellow citizens in your home district, you don't get to go back. But even from a different perspective, I believe in renourishment because I've seen not only in my part of the state, but in Palm Beach County more recently, because of what's happening in our climate, the significant erosion that has taken place near some of the most historic hotels in our country. And without that renourishment, their economic viability would be in question, and certainly their beauty. So I think that renourishment is here to stay because of what Governor McKay said, but also because I think that people really appreciate and enjoy the prettiest beaches on the planet that are in our state.
Good evening, Governors. My name is Billy Brock from Nova Southeastern University. It's been a pleasure to join in this discussion with you this evening. My question is directed to Governor Christ first. Based on your experience as Florida's chief executive, what do you think is the most effective thing that ordinary citizens, including law students, can do to preserve what is left of Florida's environment and natural resources?
Vote. Vote. It's a great question. There are many things that can be done. You know, whether you're a law student or a college student or a wonderful citizen of this state. But the most important thing I really do believe is to vote. And we have seen recently in Florida, the last election cycle, as a matter of fact, that the precious right to vote and express your concern regarding the environment or education or the economy, it was, I believe, a direct attempt to thwart that right. And by the reduction of early voting days, by the reduction of the locations with which you were allowed to vote on early voting, and the difficulty that was placed upon our fellow Floridians in exercising, which is one of the most cherished, precious rights we as Americans have. And it's one of the rights that an awful lot of our fellow Americans have fought and literally died for. And yet some people in Tallahassee wanted to make it harder for you to do it. And God bless Floridians, but I think they were first frustrated by that difficulty. But ultimately, the closer we got to Election Day, I believe our fellow Floridians, Herman, became infuriated by it and said, damn it, I don't care what obstacles or roadblocks you put in front of us, we're going to exercise that right no matter what. And right here in Miami Gardens, I was sharing this with General Butterworth on the way over, I was here during early voting, and the lines here were 4, 5, 6 hours in early voting, let alone on Election Day, and was here with the mayor, you know, trying to give people water and, you know, comfort them. And not long ago, during the President's State of the Union, a Floridian is who he and I assume the First Lady chose to invite to Washington, 102 years old, if I remember right, who, you know, God bless her, stayed in line for, I think, 7 or 8 hours, was aided and helped by her fellow Floridians in line with her to try to give her comfort. 102 years old. What kind of people pass policies that make it difficult for 102-year-old Floridians to vote? Well, you know the answer. Not the nice kind. I'll leave it at that. Thank you. Great question.
I, of course, agree that voting is very important, but it's not sufficient. You also need to acquire the skills to be an effective, active citizen. This is not quite on the point of most of the questions today, but in the mid-1970s, the power structure of Miami Beach was traumatized. They used the phrase that an iron curtain had been raised by Disney and that tourists weren't coming to South Florida anymore. And so they did what politicians have done for a long time. They set up a commission. And the commission came back with a recommendation, which was to turn South Beach into another Disney World. Tear down all of the old Art Deco buildings and replace them with modern entertainment and modern facilities. There was one woman, a lady by the name of Barbara Capitman, who said, that is a very bad idea. And she not only said it forcefully, but she had acquired the political skills to know how to overcome the City Council of Miami Beach, the Dade County Commission, the government of the state of Florida, and a significant number of people in Washington, all of whom thought Miami Beach had passed its time and let's start all over again. I think most people in this community and elsewhere would agree that the South Beach that exists today because of Barbara's efforts is a much more contributory part of our community than having a second Disney on South Beach. So my answer would be yes, vote, but also acquire the Barbara Capitman skills and spirit so that you too can make a significant contribution when your community is under greatest threat.
Florida is an interesting contradiction. We've got the oldest population and the most immature political policies. And Bob Graham has, on many occasions, spoken eloquently about that, and the reasons for it are numerous. People say, well, I don't want to pay for schools. I educated my kids in Cleveland, you know, and people, they don't take Florida newspapers. They still subscribe to the newspapers from back home. One of the big industries in Florida is shipping coffins north to be buried back home. So what we've got is we've got a culture of people who don't really feel much responsibility for this state. I think that's why, frankly, law schools have a very important role to play in Florida. They are educating some of the people in the top 1% who are going to pay attention, act maturely, and figure out how to convince the adults, their seniors, to act maturely. And I think it's a very important role to play in the state.
Thank you, Governors. Harry Truman, who used to vacation in the Keys and who helped inaugurate Everglades National Park, once said that the only thing new in this world is the history we don't know. And today we learned a lot of history, we gained some wisdom, and I think we've had a spectacular discussion. And I'd like everybody to give a round of applause to the Governors. So, governors, as a gift from St. Thomas and hopefully to encourage you to come back for a future occasion, I have for you a sustainable gift. It's not a plaque. Instead, we're going to present to you with each some coffee. St. Thomas is engaged in Café Cocannon fair trade coffee with Haiti, helping them develop a sustainable economy. We've got these bags made out of recycled material. And as a gift to everybody else, we have a reception outside. So thank you, everybody.